Monster. Noun. An imaginary creature that is typically large, ugly, and frightening. Monster legends have been around ever since the very beginning of man, a time where our ancestors witnessed creatures being torn to shreds and devoured. This is why people fear being eaten alive, otherwise known as phagophobia. Human fear is the key contributor to what makes monsters terrifying. The primal fears of man manifest themselves in the form of a monster. It explains why a lot of monster myths include the consumption of humans. For ages, humans have stood on top of the food chain with no real predators. However, when compared to monsters, they're relinquished of any power they possess and are subject to nothing more than prey. Monsters inhabit and reproduce within the human mind. When something unexplained occurs, monsters are to blame, and those beliefs are passed down from person to person, with the possibility of causing widespread hysteria. During the 19th century in New England, the residents were dropping like flies. The citizens determined that the root cause of their problems was the dead coming back to consume the living. Bodies were examined and methods were implemented. Although nowadays we know the root cause to be an outbreak of tuberculosis, back then the strange occurrences can only mean one thing: vampires. Most people are very aware of fictional vampires and the traits associated with the iconic monsters. In the beginning, vampires were known to be blood-sucking corpses or spirits, often the deceased who died violently or in sin, rising up to prey on their families. Since then, vampires have gone through several different iterations, from nothing more than blood-sucking corpses to mainstream marvels. The modern-day depiction of an aristocratic, charming, and highly sexualized version of a vampire can be traced back to Bram Stoker's Dracula. The aspects of Stoker's book continue to live on throughout other pieces of vampire literature, and the story I'll be discussing is an unofficial sequel to Dracula. In a world of the holy and unholy, where power is displayed through overwhelming dominance, there's a name that stands above everyone else, and the organization that accompanies him. The series that questions what makes a man and what makes a monster. The series is Hellsing. What is Hellsing? Hellsing is a manga written and illustrated by Kota Hirano that began serialization in May of 1997. Hirano began his career as a mangaka's assistant and later transitioned as a hentai artist. He enjoyed limited success with titles such as Angel Dust, Coyote, Gun Mania, and High Tension, although all of this would pale in comparison with his first ever successful manga, Hellsing. The series chronicles the secret Hellsing organization, a group of Protestant knights and their fight against supernatural enemies that threaten the Queen and the country of Great Britain. The name Hellsing, from which the series and the organization derives its name from, comes from the character Abraham von Helsing in Bram Stoker's Dracula.
For further instructions, consult Bram Stoker.
When it comes to vampires in media, there's a vast amount of different iterations, and Hellsing is no exception, with the series introducing unique twists to the classic creature. Vampires in Hellsing, for the most part, are based on traditional vampires, with added requirements that complement the religious themes found within the series. For someone to turn into a vampire, they must meet two requirements. They must be of the opposite gender, meaning male vampires can only produce females, and vice versa, and they must also be virgins.
Are you a virgin, my dear?
In early religious teachings, the significance of virginity can be seen as someone being holy or pure, in that one should avoid temptation that threatens their spiritual salvation. Since vampires in Hellsing can only produce other vampires of the opposite gender, the act of becoming one is a metaphor for sexual intercourse. The vampire lures in a pure and innocent human by seduction and corrupts them, where in the process of being bitten, the human loses their purity and their metaphorical virginity. If someone who isn't a virgin is bitten by a vampire, they become ghouls, zombie-like creatures with no conscience who can be controlled by the vampire that created them. The idea that the individual had already succumbed to temptation and, as such, have already lost their purity before turning. Vampires act as the central point of conflict within the series, which elevates the existence of the Hellsing organization and the most powerful weapon at their disposal, the vampire Alucard. Alucard is the main protagonist of Hellsing and the most powerful character within the series. He's a vampire who swears loyalty to the Hellsing family after being defeated by Abraham Hellsing. Throughout the story, he acts as the organization's trump card and frequently takes orders from the organization's leader, Integra Hellsing.
Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingates Hellsing.
This relationship between him and the organization is beneficial to both parties. Hellsing has a powerful weapon at its disposal that responds to every command, and Alucard can fight against new opponents, because Alucard is looking for a worthy adversary to fight against. More specifically, a human capable of rivaling him, and possibly even defeating him. It's a common trait shared among overpowered characters, seeing as how Alucard completely dominates every fight he takes part in. Alucard's character is based on Stoker's Dracula, as Hirano himself stated that it's one of his greatest sources of inspiration, which helped cultivate Alucard as a character. However, it's heavily implied that Alucard is Bram Stoker's Dracula, and throughout Hellsing, flashbacks of his past are revealed, showcasing his defeat. In 1897, the events of Bram Stoker's Dracula occurred before the events of Hellsing began. In the novel, Dracula is killed by Abraham von Hellsing with the assistance of Arthur Holmwood, Dr. John Sward, Jonathan Harker, and Quincy Morris, with the added assistance of Mina Harker, who began turning into a vampire. Quincy Morris died during the encounter, and Mina is freed from the vampire's power. His character is also based on Vlad Dracula, also known as Vlad the Impaler, who was born in Transylvania, Romania. He ruled Wallachia, Romania from 1456 to 1462. Historians describe him as a just yet cruel leader who was able to fight off the Ottoman Empire, one of the most powerful and long-lasting dynasties in world history. Vlad earned his nickname as the Impaler from his favorite way to kill his enemies, which was to impale them with a wooden stake. According to legend, Vlad would eat amongst the impaled and would occasionally use their blood as dipping sauce for his bread. These tales of brutality sparked Stoker's imagination to create Count Dracula. During Alucard's time as Vlad, he was a devout Catholic who believed that true prayer is forged on the battlefield, and that if he and his men put enough effort and sacrifice, God would intervene on their behalf. Alucard did everything he could to accomplish his goals of bringing down the New Jerusalem. He was well known for his intense brutality toward his enemies and the people who opposed him. His actions caused his own people to fear him, and subsequently, during the final battle, only a handful of peasants and soldiers came to assist him. After he lost the war and was taken prisoner, he realized that he had failed everything held dear to him. His country, his kingdom, his people, his friends, his family were all killed because of his desire for revenge, greed, war, violence, and power. After feeling abandoned by God, he abandoned God in turn and drank the blood of his subjects, becoming a vampire. Over the years, he accepts the cold hard truth that it was his own hatred toward those who had wronged him that drove his actions, and how he used the name of God to justify his own hate and lust for power.
Tell me, did your
promises come to pass? Where's your god? Where's your kingdom?
Alucard's love of battle can be traced back to his days on the battlefield, which explains why he enjoys combat so much. When Alucard meets an opponent that piques his interest, he becomes excited and starts to release the restrictions set in place to limit his power. Alucard will chant, and a portion of his true power is released. However, if Alucard is ever disappointed, he will then proceed to physically and mentally destroy his opponent.
So, I see you for what you really are. You're pathetic. Nothing but a useless, sniveling lump of meat!
But then, why have a character so powerful to begin with? Well, it puts everything into perspective, as the entirety of Hellsing is completely focused on Alucard, and allows the audience to grasp just how powerful he is when compared to other characters within the story, as it allows characters like Alexander Anderson to shine when he confronts Alucard, a mere man taking on what seems to be an unstoppable monster. Speaking of the story, it's quite interesting when you look deeper into it. Despite the fact that it has over 100 chapters, the story only has one true arc, which is the Battle of London arc, for what the vast majority of the story builds up to. The beginning portion of the story is used up for world building, introducing the main characters, Alucard, Ceres, Integra, Walter, and the primary function of the Hellsing organization. The audience is then introduced to Father Alexander Anderson, vampire hunter and agent of the Iscariot organization led by Enrico Maxwell. From there, the audience is immediately thrown into the actual story. After increasing incidents involving the undead around England and the world, Integra discovers the remnants of a Nazi organization called Millennium, led by the Major, operating with the intent of reviving Nazi Germany by utilizing an army of artificial vampires.
We just want to torture you, kill you, maybe skull fuck your corpse a couple of times, burn the house to the ground, go home and masturbate, okay?
The story continues to progress as Hellsing eliminates several of Millennium's elite soldiers before an all-out war occurs within the streets of London. The climax for the arc features a three-sided war between Hellsing, Millennium, and Vatican's Section 13 Iscariot. Near the very end of the arc, the Major's true purpose of the Millennium organization was to kill Alucard. With a story that features vampires, Nazis, Nazi vampires, and a fucking crusade against the undead and the people of London, needless to say, Hellsing is an over-the-top story with intense action, but the show does contain flaws. Because of the absolute scale of the Battle of London, nothing could have subsequently followed, as the entirety of the story was devoted to this one arc, which could explain its relatively short story. However, this is not to say Hellsing suffers from only having one arc, because it realistically benefits for being as short as it is. With Alucard being an overpowered protagonist who dominates every one of his fights, Hellsing would run the risk of becoming uninteresting, as the story would become too predictable for the audience to remain invested. So the story of Hellsing is short and sweet, allowing for a relatively quick read and preventing boredom. However, when being introduced to Hellsing, many may point out its anime adaptations. Hellsing is interesting, as it's one of those series that possesses two anime adaptations. The original Hellsing anime ran from October 10th, 2001 to January 16th, 2002, producing only 13 episodes. This version of Hellsing contains an original story, and that's because the manga didn't conclude until September of 2008, meaning this version of Hellsing was created before the manga was halfway finished. To summarize the plot, the beginning portion of the anime is almost identical to the manga, before it quickly transitions into an original storyline. Each episode feels more akin to filler, and the anime doesn't really have an overarching plot line, and very little is done to contribute to the very rushed final fight, which includes Alucard and a new villain, Incognito, a character whose motives were never explained, and with his death, the anime concludes. Hellsing Ultimate, on the other hand, is a faithful adaptation of the original manga. Ultimate only has about 10 episodes, however, each episode covers one volume of manga material, which translates to each episode being about 40 minutes in length. To say Ultimate is good is an understatement. This anime is fantastic. It's the preferred method when consuming Hellsing for the first time. From its stellar animation and a plot much closer to the original manga, ultimately it's by far the superior anime when compared to its 2001 counterpart. But that's not to say the 2001 version didn't have its pros. While it is a pretty bad anime when compared to Ultimate, it does feature one of the best soundtracks I've ever listened to. Granted, Ultimate does have a good soundtrack, but it's focused on highlighting just how grand the series is. Most of Ultimate's tracks feature orchestral and Latin choirs, whereas the original features tracks that help set the vibe for the original anime. Hellsing Ultimate is the superior anime, but the original has the best soundtrack. Throughout the story of Hellsing, 3 words are occasionally repeated and act as labels that define the characters within the series. One of Alucard's signature lines is the following question.
And what does that make you who would stand against me, soldier? A man? A dog? A monster?
The question and its answers all stem from an individual's willpower and choice, which helps determine whether or not that individual is a dog, a man, or a monster, whether they have the will to fight against monsters or remain human.
Dogs. That was a very good try. However... I cannot be killed by dogs. It takes a man in order to kill a monster.
The dog is broken up into 2 definitions. The first are individuals with very little willpower. A prime example would be the character Luke Valentine. Although he appears to be a monster, in actuality he's a dog at its fundamental core. Throughout his fight with Alucard, he begins to overestimate his abilities. Then, as Alucard begins to release the restrictions on his power, Luke begins to run away in fear, as he's incapable of defeating Alucard and opts to run with his tail between his legs. Instead of choosing to persevere, he instead chose to give up, the foundation of what makes a dog.
I should give up. That is what someone like you would say to do. Cowards who could not bear the weight of their own humanity.
The second is someone who allows others to make choices for them. The individual is devoid of any choice they may have. The captain from Millennium embodies the second definition, as he chooses to allow the major to make choices for him, making him a dog that obeys his master's orders. With the added fact that he's a werewolf only adds to this point.
You are bruised and bleeding. Your arm is hanging by a few strands of meat. What are you going to do? Will you die like a dog? Or on your feet like a man?
What does it matter, vampire?
The idea of what makes a man is not someone of a specific gender, but rather an individual of intense willpower and determination. A man is the only one capable of defeating a monster, as they still possess their humanity, something humans lose when becoming a monster. But what exactly is humanity? Well, it simply refers to the human race, which includes everyone on Earth. It's the qualities that make us human, such as the ability to love and to have compassion. In the story, when the Major is defeated by Ceres and Integra, upon the revelation of being a cyborg, Integra remarks that the Major is a monster. He rejects this notion, stating he's human despite the mechanical implants made on his body being exposed.
Look at you, Major. A clockwork monstrosity.
Deny it all you want. My humanity is not in question. I still have that one trait that puts us in ascendance even above the angels. It is my will that drives me.
Human will refers to one's capability to decide what to do for themselves instead of automatically reacting to stimuli. In a difficult situation, what will you do? Listen to your instincts or think about how you'll proceed? For as long as humans retain their will, they continue to exist, for as the Major states,
So long as I am propelled forward I am heir to something Alucard can only steal. Even if I were reduced to nothing more than a brain in a jar, synapses firing in a sea of pure thought. I am human, just like you are. Within me rests a human soul. And a human's will, precious beyond all worth.
Even though humans stand against monsters, one has to ask whether humans have become the very monsters we fear. Unlike the monsters that terrify us, they exist within folktales and fiction. Humans, on the other hand, have a detailed history of violence and brutality. Sometimes humans can be more horrible than monsters, as history can easily showcase.
Don't do it, human. Don't become a monster. A monster like me.
What exactly makes up a monster? According to Alucard, a monster is someone who gave up their humanity because they were too weak as a human. Alucard himself became a monster so that he may not die, and oftentimes regrets his decision. Immortality may be portrayed as a blessing, the ability to live forever, but at what cost?
Nosferatu, the no-life king. His castle, his kingdom, its people, his loved ones, even his very identity. Everything was lost.
Immortality caused Alucard to lose everything to time, and now he just exists in this world. When Anderson is about to become a monster with Helena's nail, Alucard tries to persuade him to remain human, not wanting Anderson to make the same mistake he made. Just like Alucard in the past, Anderson is so devoted to God that he wants nothing more than to be a weapon of divine intervention and drives the nail through his heart. From that point, Anderson becomes a monster with thorns sprouting from his body, the mere embodiment of God's will, a battle between monster and monster, in which Anderson can't win because only a human can ever hope to take down a monster. Alucard removes the nail from his body. Afterward, he breaks down and cries. Anderson, with his body shriveled and dried up, tries to calm him down, as he states,
Demons do not cry. You became a demon because you couldn't cry anymore, right? Humans cry, and when their tears finally run dry, there's nothing left but a demon or a monster, and one final prayer for death.
Anderson wanted Alucard to laugh because of the sheer irony of it all. The irony that Alucard was never a true monster because he's the one crying, and Anderson was the one who's dried up, meaning Anderson believed he was more of a monster than Alucard, and behind the tears of a vampire lies a tormented child. As Anderson fades away, Alucard says amen as a sign of respect for his once human opponent. In stark contrast to the Major's thoughts of a monster, to him, humans can continue moving forward because of their will alone, and vampires can only exist by continuously taking blood from the living. For them, blood is the currency of the soul, and the very essence of a creature. To drain someone of their blood is to absorb their soul out of them. When a vampire drinks blood, memories, abilities, and their very soul become part of that creature. With the Major heavily wounded and his cybernetic implants exposed, he begins to talk about what makes a monster. The Major, although being human, appears to be more monstrous than Alucard. However, to combat this, he states,
So many faces the monster has, and all of them stolen, all of them lies. Fitting that it took a man with the trappings of a monster to slay a monster with the trappings of a man.
The Major states that no matter what, he is human at the end of the day. Even though he's confronted with the option to become a vampire, he still chooses to remain a human because the mere thought of being anything but himself disgusts him. His true form is that of a broken man who's only able to continue living because of the implants made on his body, while the form Alucard takes upon doesn't matter. Why would it? Alucard only takes up a human form because he chooses to. He's gone by Vlad, Count Dracula, Alucard, so why does his form truly matter to him? This allowed the Major to develop his strategy of defeating Alucard. Instead of looking at him as a single entity, he's an amalgamation of human souls, a walking fortress of millions. With the blood of Schrödinger, based on Schrödinger's cat, he poisons Alucard. Schrödinger as a character was granted the ability of omnipresence. His powers can be summed up as, I think, therefore I am. If he believes believes he's at a location at any moment, then he will be there. Even if he's wounded, if he believes he's alive and unscathed, then he will be. He exists everywhere and nowhere, so long as he's fully able to recognize himself. However, in Alucard's case, since he's an amalgamation of human souls, he can no longer recognize himself. A man with many names and whose form doesn't matter becomes nothing more than a set of imaginary numbers. He's no longer dead or alive. He's everywhere but nowhere at the same time. The only way he can ever hope to return is if he can fully recognize himself, and Alucard closes his eyes for what seemed like the final time. At the very end of Hellsing, Alucard returns after 30 years of killing off every soul inside of him. He eliminated every soul from his body except one, that being Schrödinger, as his eyes now appear pink and states,
I'm also always nowhere. It's a conundrum. The truth of it is, I am everywhere.
To answer the question of what makes a monster, we must first ask what makes us human. Hellsing is absolutely fantastic. I enjoy how the series deconstructs the very idea of what makes us human, what it takes for someone like us to become a monster, how a tormented child can become an unstoppable vampire. A story of men and monsters, blood and bullets, religion and rape. It's a series not afraid to showcase the true horrors humanity is capable of. But hey, that's Hellsing, you know?
Giving up is what kills people. Those who refuse to give up are entitled their time to trample upon the weak.